I think this government of ours has been able to break the shackles of that. If you remember the famous string of pearls strategy which the Chinese used to talk of, we have been able to break the shackles of that to a great extent.
You're watching Hindustan Times. I'm Aditi Prasad and wish you all a very, very happy Independence Day. It's our 77th Independence Day. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi this morning gave out his speech from the ramparts of the Red Fort, 10th consecutive speech, may I remind you. And we have with us Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, who's joining us to decode his understanding of of Prime Minister Modi's speech. The Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain is one of India's most decorated military officers, really. He retired in 2013 as the military secretary after 40 years of service in the Indian Armed Forces. Welcome to the show, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very
Your
much.
initial thoughts on Prime Minister Modi's 10th consecutive Independence Day speech, especially that this is his last speech uh, ahead of the general elections next year.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you for having me on your show. And a big Jai Hind to the nation. Happy Independence Day to you and to all our viewers. As to your
Thank you,
question,
sir.
to come straight into it, I have been watching the last 9 years, 9.5 years. This is the 10th speech which I have watched, always with focus, very avidly. It's not very different, but if I may say, a lot of emphasis this time on the future, less on the past, a big shopping list of the achievements of the government so far. But the heartening thing was the next 25 years that he's speaking about 2047, Amrit Kal, the emphasis on technology, the emphasis on human indices, human development, a lot on women empowerment, and surprisingly and maybe happily also, very little on geopolitics. Although I would say that Mr. Modi's government has actually achieved a tremendous amount as far as geopolitics is concerned. But
Hmm.
I think for whatever 90 minutes is all that normally the Prime Minister speaks, and in this much time, perhaps he could not fit into much of geopolitics into it. But nevertheless, the message goes very clear uh, that this is not the last speech. It became very, very clear in the middle of his speech too
Yeah,
that
yeah, he was very
there are higher
categorical that he's going to
expectations.
be,
He will come back next year and speak again.
yeah, speaking from the ramparts of the Red Fort in 2024 again. So, but most of his speech was like a sort of a 9-year report card of his government. And you're right, very little emphasis on geopolitics. But nevertheless, he talked about a national character that sort of uh, a national emerging national character that looks at the prosperity of the entire world. And he talked about how after COVID, now India is viewed as a friend of the world.
I
And
think
that perhaps,
that's a very correct observation on your part. There's no doubt that the intent of Mr. Modi seems to be to build up in not just India internally, but to build up India to take on leadership aspects of the world. And he's harking back to the COVID experience, which is a very good example to give because we are one of the few nations which, first of all, emerged from COVID and have reached the 6.5%, the fastest growing economy of the world. We actually enabled a lot of supply chains, although we were at the receiving end of a lot of assistance from the world too. It did show international cooperation. It did show globalization in a very big way, in a different context completely. Much of the world talks about the end of globalization, actually COVID, and what Mr. Modi is looking at today is actually projecting the future of globalization.
absolutely. Coming to your area of specialization and which is defense, Mr. Modi was very categorical that borders are far more secure today than they ever were. But problems with China continue, sir. And there are these ships that are continuing to dock in Sri Lanka, the Chinese ships. Uh, so yes, maybe the borders are far more secure, but then not so secure at the same time because of the Chinese threat, of course, and there's the niggling Pakistani problem.
See, when we look at this comprehensively, Aditi, there's no doubt that security has received a tremendous amount of attention of this government. And in its last 10 years of the tenure, some very strong challenges have also emerged and have also been overcome. Among those which have been overcome, I would say Jammu and Kashmir to a very great extent. The
Right.
stabilization of the line of control, the stabilization of the situation inside Jammu and Kashmir, and the western borders by and large being stable. Where the instability came in the middle, perhaps around 2020 and thereafter, has been the line of actual control. There too, if you see, symbolically, if you look at it, as Mr. Modi is meeting in South Africa, was meeting in South Africa, the BRICS leaders, you also had their 19th meeting of the corps commanders in Ladakh, which has been an
Right.
ongoing process, as you're aware, an attempt to try and seek stability, to try and ensure that the Chinese vacate those areas into which they seem to have transgressed, in which some kind of limitations have been imposed upon the Indian side, etc. This is work in progress. No one can say that it is an unstable border or a stable border. I would say it's just work in progress. As to the Indian Ocean, on this aspect of docking of ships, it's not just Sri Lanka. I would say a lot on Coco Island, Myanmar
Absolutely.
itself, right from the Straits of Malacca, right till Gwadar and beyond to Djibouti. This area is going to emerge as one of the most important regions of the world. This is the area through which the world's entire 80% of the traffic, commercial traffic, actually travels through. And the Chinese are fully aware of it and are seeking their opportunities, are also safeguarding themselves by trying to establish relationships with our neighbors everywhere. But I think this government of ours has been able to break the shackles of that. If you remember the famous string of pearls strategy which the Chinese used to talk of, we have been able to break the shackles of that to a great extent. This is again work in progress, and we will see much more of it as the years come by.
How do you think we've been able to break the string of pearls shackles? Could you sort of
One,
explain that to our
yes,
viewer?
yes. Let me explain this. At the beginning of Mr. Modi's tenure, in the first tenure itself, we were seeing Hamban Tota emerging virtually as a major threat, actually. We thought it's going
Right.
to develop into a Gwadar like port, it's going to
A
develop
border
into
like Chinese port, correct.
Chinese port, absolutely, with facilities for them, with docking, etc. It's, it's not really happened. And Sri Lanka, in the throes of instability, had the option of either going to China or to India. I think it chose very, very correctly that it's best to invest in its neighbor. It came to India. $4 billion is what India invested recently in assisting Sri Lanka to come out of the problems, the basic economic problems which had stricken it after the COVID pandemic. And also, if you remember the famous 18th April Easter bombings in 1919, in 2019, I think the relationship between India and Sri Lanka has come on an even keel thereafter. And to a great extent, we have been able to dilute and erode Sri Lanka's dependence on China. And this is the core center of the string of pearls strategy, because this is the physicality of it lies here. Then there's Maldives, of course, there's Bangladesh, there's lots of things happening. Pakistan, of course, is there, and the relationship between Pakistan and China continues to remain very strong. But we also see there are dents appearing from time to time. Only recently, we've seen a couple of attacks on Chinese workers who have been working on
Yes.
the China-Pakistan economic corridor. We have seen that the China-Pakistan economic corridor has not reached its commercial aspirations, which it was were being sought at one particular time. So there too, the relationship isn't as strong as what may appear and what Pakistan may like to project. Besides that, of course, with Bangladesh, I think we have a far stronger relationship today, having resolved some of the territorial issues. Maybe the rivers issue has not been resolved completely, but a lot of territorial issues which have been resolved with Bangladesh, and to that extent, our our relationship is stronger. Retrieval of the Indo-Nepal relationship, a stronger
Yeah.
Indo-Bhutan relationship. All this has emerged. Although China is making all its efforts to try and make inroads here. But I think now with a stronger economic, or being on a stronger economic wicket, India is in a position to reach out much more and perhaps do much more for its near abroad region.
And damage China's ambitions in the process.
Ambitions, absolutely.
Can you briefly take us through what's happening with Coco Island? Because since we're talking the string of pearls strategy, Coco Island is a very important part of it. What are the interventions from the India side as far as safeguarding that region
Of
for our
course,
interests is concerned?
yes, this problem goes back, it's not recent, it goes back fairly long. And this is one area from where eavesdropping on our electronic information, electronic data, which is going out from India, all this is done, has been done primarily from this area of Coco Island. The China-Myanmar relationship has been strong. We have also, despite lots and lots of advice about, the democratization, following, backing up the democratic movement within Myanmar itself, we have held ourselves back, and we have been ambivalent as far as our relationship with Myanmar is concerned. That itself is a strong message to Myanmar that they not put all the eggs into the Chinese basket, be dependent completely on China. Over a period of time, we have been reaching out to Myanmar. Uh, and this by itself is a major message to them that Coco Island should not be allowed to be exploited completely because of its the geostrategic location, which is a very, very important location in the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean region.
Fair enough, fair point. The Prime Minister also talked about the need for mega reforms in the armed forces. A lot of reforms have already been undertaken, including getting women into combat roles. What do you think is next?
Well, I expected it. I expected, just like many years ago, 2019 to be precise, Prime Minister Modi used the ramparts of the Red Fort to announce the appointment of the Chief of the Defense Staff, CDS, if you remember. There was a lot of expectation this time from many people in the environment that the Prime Minister could make the announcement about the theaterized concept, the theater system of the Indian Armed Forces. It did not
Yeah.
happen. To an extent, I'm happy it did not happen. And I qualify that. I think we need not be in a hurry on this particular subject. It's a very, very complex issue, which essentially for our viewers is the integration of all three armed forces, the integration of their command structure in such a manner that you only have three theaters in India. That's what is being looked at the moment. Three theaters, it could be four theaters also, which is a maritime theater looking after the complete maritime zone with the Army, Air Force, Navy, all under command of a single headquarters and a single
Yeah.
commander. Similarly, a northern theater which looks after China, it is adversary based, not geographically based, and completely towards China. And the third, completely towards Pakistan, a western theater. Now, it's easier said than done. We have been, for the better part of the last 76 years, we have been functioning as single entities in the services. They've all got their own ethos, they've all got their own system, although a lot of
Yeah.
effort has been there to try and bring in jointness. But jointness is not integration. Integration means a soldier is also virtually an airman and also a sailor, which means at senior levels, you have to have the understanding to be
Or
able
both.
to look at security, look at strategic aspects from a three-dimensional angle, from the surface, from the sea, and from the air. Now, this is not
Right.
something easy to achieve for people who are dyed in the wool in the color of their uniforms. So it's going to take time. Of course, somewhere a beginning will have to be made. It should be made after thinking this through to a great extent. It's already been thought through in the last 3, 4 years, but I think a deeper kind of a wargaming effort, etc., should go on, and it should happen not just between the three services, but also with the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Home Affairs, with the political community, and with the bureaucratic community. Until everyone gets their act together, this system cannot work.
Let's talk about the self-reliance in defense. That's one of the main mottos, one of the main torches that this government has been carrying. Uh, Defense production also sort of crossed the 1 lakh crore mark for the first time in financial year 2022-23. So that's a very good sign, means we're in the right direction. But what is it that still is holding us back in that sphere? What more can the government do to unshackle this area?
See, Aditi, we started late. If we got to accept it, we started late. This could have happened many years ago. When Mr. Modi came to power, uh, I think it's just around that time the realization started that if India needed a transformation in its defense technology, particularly, and of course in doctrine and methodologies and organizations and things like that, it had to start with technologies, and we just did not have the technologies with us. We needed to import 150 billion to 200 billion dollars worth of hardware, and that's the time the realization hit us that why should we spend $200 billion on giving that money to external agencies? Why can't we do this internally? Why don't we create the capability? Why don't we provide the jobs to our own people to allow that money to remain within the Indian system? I think that was a
Right.
very wise thought. But these kind of things can't happen overnight. I would still compliment the government that in 10 years, what they have been able to achieve has been a hell of a lot. Just to take off itself took almost 5 years, right? And after 5 years, I think they've taken some strong decisions. Uh, the decisions such as, for example, placing a ban on certain items, despite the fact that those items could be critical items for critical equipment in the defense of the country. It was a huge risk that the government of India was taking, but they've taken it. And I think it's only augured very well for the system. Our research and development capability over the years has been poor. I think a lot of trust has now been reposed in the DRDO and the various other research agencies within the country. And a commitment has been finally given that we will purchase from local manufacturers. All this while, the local manufacturer, the Make in India man, was never given that assurance that if he achieves something, his item would actually win against international competition and be absorbed by the Indian Armed Forces. Today, that kind of a trust has been established with the manufacturers, and I
Hmm.
think we are just at the beginning of this. What Mr. Modi was probably looking at is that by 2047, that's the next 25 years, we'll be so technically endowed that there'll be nations from the world coming to us for defense technologies and not the other way around. Very correctly quoted by you, 100,000 crores worth of defense manufacturing locally, which has been done, is a great sign. Also, a lot of our equipment being sought by different countries, Argentina, Vietnam, Brazil, and things like that. All this augurs well. I would say, don't think that in this sector, I would tell a lot of people, this sector, don't be discouraged by small numbers at the beginning. We are right at the beginning of our quest, but we will go very far in this.
I think thank you so much, sir. Thank you for giving us that perspective. Of course, there are many structural, financial, and in fact even procedural constraints or issues that need to be addressed before India becomes the power that it wants to become at 2047. But we seem to be propelled already in the right direction. But thank you so much for joining us and giving
Thank
us
you
this
very much.
perspective.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us, sir.